Great, thank you. First of all, we welcome you to our panel. And for our opening question, it also came up on our Twitter feed as well as just a common question from our attendees. We were wondering, what is your school's mission statement concerning working on the behalf of underserved communities in your capture area? Do you offer any type of incentive for your students, and also just what participation do you have in those communities? And we can start with Dr. Kelly.
UC San Diego students, I think, all end up spending considerable time working in underserved communities in San Diego County. Our school, I think, was at the cutting edge of starting student-run free clinics, and so anyone who's visited our school knows that we now have 4 separate student-run free clinics that operate in different underserved areas of our county, some of which, each of which has sort of a different focus, and I won't go into that in detail. About 85% of our students spend time either in elective coursework or continued service time working in our student-run free clinics, and some students in their MD, PhD programs may actually serve in those clinics for as long as 8 years. In addition, we have a new mentoring and advising structure in the School of Medicine, which is a academic community-based model of instruction, and one of the charges to each of the academic communities is to establish service learning opportunities for students in our community of San Diego. And so through both the elective curriculum mechanism as well as through academic communities, we do have the expectation that all of our students will learn a lot about cultural competence and how to serve a variety of different populations. Of course, we have a very, very diverse state.
So Dr. Clifton, would you care to expand?
Sure. The Commonwealth Medical College is a community-based medical college. So we were started by funding from the state and from the local community. So our whole mission is to give back to the community. We probably the best incentives we do for people that want to become physicians in Northeast Pennsylvania is we let them into medical school. So it really is the focus of what we're doing, and so that sort of translates into admissions. The other thing that we do is we have students out in the community throughout the whole 4 years. So during the first and second year, they spend 3 weeks in the community, in physicians' offices, in agencies in the community. And then each student is required to spend 100 hours over the 4 years in community service activities. So I think that kind of demonstrates our mission there.
Okay, so next question. What's the impression of essays based on a personal or family health issue? Is there any suggestions on how to spin this in a way that can help rather than hurt the personal statement? And what % of applicants would you say use that approach in their personal statement? Ms. Rosenthal?
Oh, that's hard to say. I've been in admissions now for about a quarter of a century, a little bit longer than I really care to admit. And so I've read a lot of personal statements. I read each completed application cover to cover personally. And I see, well, a lot of times if it's really relevant, it can be a very important factor in the personal statement. If it's a main reason as to how you decided to come to the practice of medicine, that you wanted to go into medical school. But sometimes I see some applicants be a little overly dramatic. And when you read so many files, that just becomes maybe a little irritating. So as long as you do it in an appropriate way, as long as you write from the heart, it can be more effective.
Yeah, I think I read a lot of statements every year too, and I've been in admissions for about 10 years now. We get a lot of students telling us their personal stories with health reasons, and I think the key thing that I try to take away from them is overcoming, how you overcame, what skills you gained from overcoming that situation, because I think that's what I'm looking for is what you got out of it to make you a better doctor. And so if you're able to show that across in your essay, that you had the situation and you overcame it and what you learned from it and what you gained and how that would help you be a better doctor, maybe a more compassionate doctor, that's what I'm looking for when I see those type of stories.
So next question, how does your school view non-traditional students? Would you say that there is an advantage or a disadvantage, and do you have any suggestions for non-traditional students? Ms. Cunningham, if you'd like to start.
Well, I think first, it's tough to define non-traditional, right, guys? How many of you in the room would consider yourself a non-traditional applicant? Just a show of hands. There you go. So, you are important. Believe it or not, you are important. Non-traditional students bring an edge to the applicant pool that perhaps a traditional, quote-unquote, traditional student might not. For example, work experience, life experience. Perhaps you are changing careers from being a professional nurse, working in an industry of business, and now have an interest in medicine. So non-traditional students is another category of diversity, if you will. Diversity comes in different shapes, sizes, backgrounds. So for me, for the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona, I believe being a non-traditional student is not a disadvantage, and if anything, it would advantage you over peers that perhaps are transitioning directly from undergraduate university training into medical school. That doesn't mean you're taking away from a traditional student's skills and development and their competitiveness either. But if you are a traditional student or non-traditional student, you have to show what makes you unique regardless of your path to medicine. So I hope that for the non-traditional students in the crowd, you don't see yourself disadvantaged in the process. If anything, capitalize on your experiences and your adult years in career, wherever you have been, and use that to your advantage, certainly.
I think that's a great answer, and I think that there's still this lingering notion out there that somehow you have to be a little defensive if you're a non-traditional applicant. And I think that the reality behind that was that when many of us applied to medical school, I graduated from medical school in 1980, if you were not on that linear track from college to medical school, you really did have to justify and explain, and you were put on the defensive, I think, by admissions committees. And there's been a sea change since then. In fact, now I think admissions committees really remark on the groundedness and maturity and how interesting, many of our non-traditional applicants are. And so I think this is one of these things where the good old days were not necessarily good. It's actually better now for non-traditional students than it used to be.
So a follow-up question to that is, non-traditional students are typically balancing very well-developed lives, such as families or careers, marriages and relationships. How does that compare to a traditional student's ability to have that extra time for extracurriculars? Does it take away? Do you have any suggestions about that, Dr. Clifton?
Well, I think in general, we're looking at the whole application and putting it in the context of your resources. And so if you're raising a family, you're going to learn way more raising a family than volunteering for 100 hours in the emergency department. Does that make sense? I mean, you're really, you're going to get a lot of life experience out of doing those life things that are going to add some stability to you. If you're in a good relationship, whether it's married, family, or just a relationship, that's going to give you more resources to get through the first year of medical school. So that transition can be difficult, and things that are going to help you do that are good.
Do you have any?
I just have one thing to add to. We do see a lot of non-traditional applicants in our applicant pool, but one of the things to keep in mind too is if you've been out of school for 2 to 3 years, keep in mind that the medical school curriculum is extremely rigorous. So you might want to consider just taking some additional upper division science courses just to keep your knowledge fresh and just to prepare yourself for the rigors of medical school.
Thank you. And going off of the rigorous medical school curriculum, I was just wondering, what are some extracurricular activities that are available to different medical students in your organizations? Are there any? Ms. Torres?
We have a lot, more probably than students are able to join. Because of, the medical field, we get a lot of students interested in volunteering, leadership, conferences, going out to medical student conferences like this and organizing, a lot of organizing skills and service. I want to say also regarding non-traditional students as far as being married and families, we do have a spousal support group for where spouses of medical students get together and kind of discuss their issues, challenges, get advice from each other. Throughout our extracurricular activities, we also have students with kids, and so some of our extracurricular activities will include bringing in a bounce house or something for the kids, because we realize that some of our students may not be able to come or attend if they need to find a babysitter for the kids, and so we kind of target that for students too. So extracurricular activities, yes, for everybody, and like I said, there's more than usually students are able to do, and a lot of our students typically are interested in those curricular activities that are for service, and also leadership opportunities to get out there and network at conferences and travel nationwide too when they're students.
Ms. Cunningham?
You know, extracurricular activities in medical school, it's more about career development, professional development, leadership development. So whatever you find passion in doing, perhaps it's a pediatric activity now and you want to continue that into medical school. Most medical schools, and certainly I'll speak for the U of A, if it is an interest of yours and it has a goodwill attached to it, if you will, it's giving back to the community, it's altruistic in nature, the medical school administration will do just about everything we can to nurture that interest, because again, it's important to give back to the community wherein you're residing for the next 4, potentially 8 years if you stay for residency training and beyond. So long as your extracurricular activity is, again, altruistic and it's a passion of yours, then the medical school community will support your extracurricular activity. And you don't learn leadership in the classroom. You guys have to practice just as you're doing right now. And professional development, it's a natural, ongoing, organic process. So wherever we can give you those extra time, extracurricular opportunities, we certainly encourage that in our medical school. No medical student comes to medical school, at least for us, and just goes to class and goes home. That's not who you are today, and you won't change when you become a medical student. You guys are amazing at time management, so you'll continue doing the great things you're doing now.
All right, so since we were going along with the non-traditional theme, what are some options for students besides a post-bac that they can do in their time off that you think would give them a little bit more of a competitive edge? I know there's probably so many things, but what are probably your top 2 favorite? And I think this is a panel question where everyone can join in. Dr. Kelly, would you like to start?
I don't know that we have 2 top favorites. Many of our non-traditional students will come to us after having gone quite far down the road in a particular career. So we have former lawyers who are now medical students. We have people who used to work in healthcare consulting or public health sectors who are now medical students. We have former investigators, researchers who are now medical students. And so for us, it's not as much about just taking a couple years off and then coming to medical school. It's learning more about what that student learned in their previous life before applying to medical school, and how they made that transition, what the process they went through that convinced them that in fact the best pathway for them was now going to be a different one.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really have a favorite thing other than Peace Corps, because I did it. But whatever you do, do something big. Whatever it is, if it's, if you're interested in helping the homeless, build a homeless shelter. I mean, really think big, do something big. Medical school's big, being a physician is big, and so showing that you can do something big will help you.
A lot of our students come to us, and a lot of them have done international mission work or just something healthcare related. And as long as it's something that you feel passionate about, and you can show that in your application, that's what we're looking to see. Frequently we'll see candidates come in and they'll just have a spattering of activity like right before they started their application. But what we're looking for is a pattern of volunteerism, medically related experience, something that shows that you're a leader, that you're service oriented, and that you have a passion for people.
I think for me personally, my favorite is international experience and learning about healthcare outside of the U.S. and being able to compare that. Luckily, I'm not the only one reading your application, so I may like international experience where other people will be looking at other things that you've done. But definitely, if you are able to travel internationally and do some type of healthcare work, like I said, personally, I like when I see that, and definitely when I interview students, I hear a lot of what they gained from that and their perspective from traveling internationally.
I'll play devil's advocate for a moment, guys, with regard to post-bac programs and additional academic work. You heard Dr. Pearl talk about medical education and debt. You have to safeguard yourselves as best you can from incurring additional educational debt prior to coming to medical school. If you are looking to keep yourself engaged in between a gap from undergraduate or graduate studies to medical school, going back to college isn't your only opportunity. So to the panels, to their wisdom, find an activity. And if you can't afford to travel internationally, look in your own backyard, because there are tremendous opportunities to learn about healthcare disparity, cultural competence, all of the other wonderful things that are absorbed through international travel without even leaving your own neck of the woods or even the country. So before you up and leave, just for the sake of maybe meeting an expectation of a medical school admissions committee, look very hard to your passion. And if it's in your local community, we're not going to disadvantage or discount that experience over the student that perhaps spent a summer traveling abroad. So safeguard yourselves. Don't take classes just because you think you need to take additional coursework.
Thank you. So to kind of change directions a little bit, as applicants, we always hear that research is always a nice big part of your application, and we were wondering, is there a preference between science-based research or other types of research, such as social research? Do you have an opinion on that, Ms. Rosenthal?
Well, actually, my school, Rocky Vista University, is not a research institution. So research is something while most of our applicants come in with some, it's not something that we put a lot of emphasis on. We would prefer to see more of the health-related experience and more of the service and the volunteer experience as a DO school.
I'll say the same for Midwestern. We are a teaching institution and we do some research, and that's typically what we see from our students. Clinical students who are interested in jumping into the clinical as soon as possible. And we do have students who have done research, and we have faculty that do research, but typically it's not one of our priorities.
For the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, we have a 4-year scholarly project, graduation requirement of our medical students, that you enter into medical school, you create and design your own project, ultimately research your topic, and produce a manuscript-style product at the end of your 4th year. And it's demonstration of lifelong learning, giving you the skills and techniques that you will continue throughout your career. So for us in the research world, think of research beyond wet lab research. It's not about splitting DNA. There's so much more to research, and a researchable question can be about health disparity or homeless youth and nutritional deficiencies within homeless youth, social science topics, health disparity topics, etc. So we do value research in our applicants because it's not about the research, but rather your lifelong learning, your critical thinking skills. That's what research is evidence of, or it shows and helps identify those key areas. So for the University of Arizona, research is important, but again, it's not about splitting DNA and becoming the next biochemist, Nobel Peace Prize winner. It's about managing your own researchable topic and carrying it through to completion.
I think it's good for you in the audience to hear this diversity, right, of approaches at different schools. And so at UC San Diego, most of you would probably think of us as a very research-intense institution, and we are. But the reality is that the vast majority of our graduates are practicing physicians. They're not investigators. And so what we want is every graduate of our school to be either a practicing scientist, that's a minority, or someone who can be informed by science. And so we do expect that through the educational process, you'll be able to read current literature and understand it and understand the methods and the statistics and be able to see how your practice is going to change as a result of research going on. But for entering students, we're much more in line now with the AMCAS approach to activities, which is tell us your most meaningful activities. We don't want to see a list of 15 things. We want to hear about a couple of things that you've done in depth, and that may be research, it may be research in social sciences, clinical research, basic research, but it needs to be meaningful, and you need to be able to talk about it and defend it if you're going to call it something that's meaningful. So even, I guess what I'm saying is even at a very research-intense school, we have many students who do not do basic science research before successfully matriculating at our school.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We look at research, but we also look at leadership and community service, and you know, they're kind of just in the range of activities that you can do. It's one of the possibilities. One thing I would say is if you're going to do research, you know, do research and actually know what it's about, know why you're doing it. In the interviews, we do delve into your research project and really see, do you understand it, or were you just, you know, washing dishes and that sort of thing?
Thank you. So, Dr. Clifton, we'll start with you again. If I was a transfer student and I have already taken all of my pre-med requisites in my community college before I transfer to my university or four-year college, should I retake them again, or will that still count? How does that reflect on my application?
Again, we sort of look at the whole application and trying to put it into context. So I would say I would expect you, if you're a science major, you're going to take more advanced science courses, and we're going to get a sense of how you do in science above and beyond the basic courses. If you're a history major, then, you know, it'll be a little bit different. Then we would look at your MCAT and really kind of see, you know, if you do really well on the MCAT, then that would be fine. I mean, it's hard. There's a lot of different options and scenarios that it's hard to just give one answer for that.
Ms. Rosenthal?
Yeah, there's so many variables that go into a GPA. I think most admissions committees look at the whole picture. I mean, we look at the bottom line, but then we look at where you went to school, how your classes were stacked, you know, if there's an upward trend. Did you take the bare bone minimum requirements? Did you take some upper division classes? There's just a lot involved. Certainly, we don't hold anything against community colleges. If you start at a community colleges and you transfer to a four-year school and you know, take upper division courses and do well, that's fine. Similarly, if you, you know, take like an organic chemistry course or something like that at a community college this summer, that's fine as well. As long as it's an accredited school, you're fine.
Yeah, I second that. We sometimes, for students that taken majority of their courses or prereq courses at a community college, we'll just balance that with your MCAT and make sure that you have the knowledge also based on your MCAT. Sometimes I will advise students if you know, they take one or two courses at a university level, maybe the upper level courses, even though it may not be required, again, maybe going above the requirements, it can give you an edge as far as the competitiveness of your application.
Okay, and would, Ms. Cunningham, if I were studying for the MCAT, would you suggest a certain time? Like, how much studying should I put in my MCAT, especially since I am taking a full course load during my school year? Should I wait towards the summer, or what are your opinions on that?
How many stomachs just dropped when she said study for MCAT, right? So each of you is an individual learner. So you only know where you are academically with your time management, your study skills. I cannot suggest enough to you to could go through quite a few diagnostic exams, get a good base, and then from that base, judge your study plan. Same strategy we use with our medical students preparing for boards, step 1 and 2, is to understand where you are strongest and where you are weakest. And don't focus on the strength of your application. Don't worry about taking from a 10 on your biological sciences and aiming for the 14, okay? Work on your weakest attributes in your area. So for each of you, you come with a different preparedness. for the MCAT. You can't start soon enough, but I say that, and I'm picturing our first year medical students that walk onto campus with orientation or for orientation carrying first aid for step 1. Okay, this is the study guide to boards. They're focusing 2 years in advance. You can be paralyzed by data, right? Data analysis, paralysis, or paralysis, you know what I'm saying. So be careful in how much time you put into it, because you will lose sight of everything else around you. So just as you will have to juggle academics with your extracurricular activities, etc., you will go through that same evolution and time management as you're preparing for the MCAT. So start with some diagnostic exams, find out where your base is, and try to start studying for it. But if it's not working for you by the time you take your second diagnostic exam, adjust your course, okay? Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over, and expecting a different outcome, right? So you'll have to go through some course adjustments. Take advantage of resources that are there to help you. You each likely have a career learning resource officer or office department on your undergraduate campuses. Look into products. You can look to Kaplan and some other test preparation companies if you can afford this, or get some scholarships, because there's help there for you, just as there's help when you're a medical student when you're facing the same challenge studying for your boards. So each of you has a different answer. There's a different answer for each of you. But globally, start soon to get a base.
You'll be amazed at how many times I've heard applicants say, well, I got a really low score, but I didn't really study. So that was actually pretty good for me. Don't let that happen to you. Like she said, definitely put in the time. But many times we do hear that. And I hear that from students that are applying with the low MCAT, and they'll say, well, like I said, I didn't really study for it. So I need to retake. Rather take it once, but put in all the effort that you can, especially during the breaks of between your semester breaks.
I wanted to add one thing too.
Okay.
One thing I frequently hear from our applicants when they're not happy with their MCATs, they're like, well, I took all these practice tests and I scored so much higher. And then when I talk to them a little bit more, I find out that they didn't take timed test. So getting the timing down is also very crucial. Because keep in mind, when you're sitting at that exam, you're going to have all these butterflies going on and everything. So it's really important, no matter how well you know the material, to work on the timing as well.
We actually had a follow-up question on our Twitter feed. So for Ms. Cunningham, you were advocating for starting early, getting prepared early for the MCAT. And so someone asked, what can we do as freshmen and sophomores that can prepare us and give us that foundation for our MCAT studying?
You know, when you are early in your undergraduate career, you're going through a transition of trying to understand how to compartmentalize 16 weeks of academic information into a subject content that you can retain. So at that level, you should be worrying more about comprehension of material, finding the best strategy for studying for exams, because everyone studies in a different way. And if you are trying to study based on your friend's study prescription, it's not going to work for you. So I think in your earlier formative years, you really should be developing those sound study skills and try to spread the content out and absorb bite-sized pieces. So not waiting until the last minute. And I wish somebody would have told me this when I was an undergraduate student, that you don't study for exams the week before the exam. You begin studying from that very first lecture. And some of you will need to attend absolutely every single lecture there is. And others, those that we're jealous of, that come to class maybe once a week and still do better on the exams than you, they're learners, they're just a different learner. So it's about finding who you are, what kind of academic learner you are, doing a lot of self-analysis, self-reflection, self-assessment, so that by the time you are ready to tackle the MCAT, you have a solid study plan and pattern and behavior. So you're not retraining yourself to study for a big exam. It should be the same way you've been studying all along, so long as you've been practicing and developing that study plan.
Thank you. So in our last panel, Dr. Gordon talked about, he kind of touched on how to talk about a bad mark that could potentially hurt your application in your interview. So I was wondering, how could we approach a potentially bad year in our personal statement? Like, what approaches should we take, or should we even go that route? Dr. Kelly, would you like to start?
I think it depends on how bad the bad year was. But if it's pretty bad and it's really stands out compared to the other years, then if you don't address it, you may not move further in that application process. So I think having the information that somehow deals with that is very important on the application, so that the sympathetic ears and eyes on the other end of that application will say, okay, I get it, I understand what happened here, and it's not an issue anymore. There's all kinds of things that happen to people in the course of their undergraduate years, and most of them that have negative impacts on academics are very understandable, as long as someone has had the ability to move past the event, whatever it is, personal health, family health, lots of different issues that happen. So I think it is important to deal with it, and it's important to then prepare yourself to how you're going to discuss it in person. Because it's one thing to be able to write an essay about what went awry during my sophomore year in college. It's another thing to be able to have a face-to-face conversation with an interviewer about it. It can be emotional. It can be something that you're not sure you can really go there in person with somebody else. So if that's the case, if it is something that is an emotional issue for you, practice and do a lot of mock interviews with people asking you tough questions before you go on interview trips, because the hardest thing to have happen, I think, for an applicant is to get that far in the process and then kind of fall apart in the interview and not be able to hold it together because you're having sort of a recrudescent emotional response to whatever happened. So I'm a big fan of mock interviews. I tell our medical students this for residency interviews as well. If you're going to put something in a personal statement that deals with an issue in your medical school record, that's fine, but just realize you're going to need to talk about it then and practice talking about it.
Again, I would agree. The one thing I'd add is, first of all, make sure it's really a problem. You know, I've talked to applicants who got a C in freshman math and then went and got all A's the rest of the college, and were so freaked out by that when I asked them about, geez, what happened in freshman math, they just sort of fell apart. So, make sure. And then the other thing is, if it really was a problem and you have a good reason to explain it, then explain it. Because we tend to imagine things being worse than they really are. Okay, so just as, reading applications. So if you address it and you tell us exactly what happened, why, and how you overcame that can actually be a strength. You went through something really difficult, you're able to figure out how to turn it around and recover and do well, as long as it wasn't partying, okay? If you were partying for a year and that's what you had to overcome, that's not so great. But otherwise, something big in your life, that can be a strength.
Okay, now we have a financial aid question from our Twitter feed. We were wondering, is financial aid equal amongst MD students and MD PhD students who are receiving a stipend? Now, I'm not sure whose organizations offer that program, possibly UC San Diego or...
No, it's not equal. So for, at least at UCSD, for MD, PhD students who are in the medical scientist training program, they receive a stipend and their fees are fully covered. So for students in the regular MD program, most of our financial aid is awarded on a need-based basis. We do have some what we call merit-based financial aid available as well that would be on top of whatever need-based aid a student qualifies for, but none of our financial aid packages for straight MD students would cover the entire cost of tuition and housing and fees. For MSTP program, all tuition's covered plus the stipend, and the stipend basically will cover housing and everything else.
Thank you. And to close up the panel for today, I just have one question and I would like everybody to answer. What are the most important characteristics of a doctor to you? So what characteristics do you try and instill in your students to pass on for future generations of medicine? Starting with whoever.
I'll jump in. I appreciate, so I have 3 children. We go to the pediatrician often, and I appreciate the physician, and I'm thinking of my kids because I don't go to the physician as often as I probably should, certainly not as often as kids do. But with technology, the infusion of technology, you heard Dr. Pearl talk about electronic healthcare records and on and on and on. There is now a computer between me and the physician. And that computer is a really useful tool. They're charting, they're making very accurate notes, they are assessing my child's whatever it may be, growth or situation that we're visiting the office for. But with that computer, there's a loss of human connection. I feel that way with my pediatrician. And so I think the challenge for you and the next generation of physicians is how to take technology into your practice and still maintain the human contact. And you can do that through active listening, conversation that can be lost due to typing and having to run quickly from one room to the next. But I truly, truly appreciate the physician that just for that 5 minutes, maybe 60, depending on what's going on, truly sits there and leans forward and actively listens to why we're there in the office that day. And they can be the most skilled individual, the most talented physician, but if that technology gets in the way of that human communication, I will find another physician. And I think human communication, it's been replaced too many times with the advent of wonderful technology. But for me, that's the most important attribute in a physician.
I think finding that balance and being able to combine compassion and competence. So kind of knowing your skill, knowing your field, but again, being able to communicate that. But I really think that for me, it's that balance of compassion and competence are both very important, and it's what I look for personally in a doctor. And I think it can be a little tough to balance that because you focus too much on the competence or trying to be compassionate and very nice, but maybe not doing all your research. But I think definitely those are my keywords: compassion and competence.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things we look for in admissions, the litmus test is this a person that we would feel comfortable taking our loved ones to treat once they became a physician? And we bring that type of person into our school, and also we work to ensure that they retain those qualities through medical school and go on and become a physician like that, and to ensure that we have a standardized patient program so that from the first semester in school, they are educated into how to approach patients and how to retain that level of compassion and communication and eye contact and things like that.
So as long as we're bashing pediatricians, I'll kind of give you a short story about our first child was born, and we had him, we had a crib, but he just wouldn't go to sleep in the crib, and so, but he would go to sleep if he was laying next to us in bed. Well, when he was born, in Los Angeles anyways, where we were, that was about the worst thing you could do to a baby. The pediatricians just thought that was horrible, that we were going to roll over and smother the kid. We're like, come on, we're not sleeping. There's no way we can roll over and smother him if we're not sleeping because he's crying the whole time. So at the first visit with the pediatrician, Thomas was 3 days old, 4 days old, something like that. She says, so where's he sleeping? And we said, oh, in bed with us. And she goes, oh, that's really not good. You need to put him in the crib. So then he was losing a lot of weight, so we had to go back in about a week. And so the first thing she said is, so where's the baby sleeping? And we both, without even pausing, we both at the same time said, in the crib. Well, of course, he was sleeping in bed with us, and we get out, afterwards, and I look at my wife and I said, son of a bitch, the kid's not even 2 weeks old, and we're lying to our pediatrician. Like, what's the deal with that? Come on. Right? But to me, it's all about being patient-centered, about being what works for one family, what works for one child, for one grandmother, may not work for another, and really understanding the person so that you can come up with a plan that's really going to work for them. To me, that's key.
Yeah, all of the themes that have been touched on, I think, are wonderful ones. We sometimes talk about the 3 C's, so competent, compassionate, and conscientious. Somebody who follows up on everything is being very important. One of our admissions committee's favorite things to see in letters of recommendation about applicants is that line that this is somebody who I would want to have as my physician. You don't actually see it that often, but when you do, it's a very powerful statement. I guess I'll close my remarks by saying that we had the incredible privilege early in the school year this year of having Abraham Verghese from Stanford, who's the head of medical humanities, I think, at Stanford Medical School, come and speak to our entering students on their first day of class. And he told this anecdote, which I will try to reproduce, which was that he had sent a patient who had a new diagnosis of cancer to a academic medical center that had a wonderful state-of-the-art cancer center. And the patient went and got their treatment plan elucidated and articulated for them, and came back and then transferred their care to the same small-town physician that they had been seeing all along. And when he asked the patient, why did you do that? After going to the Mecca and getting all of that information and state-of-the-art care, the patient said, well, because every time I go to see my doctor in my hometown, they talk to me, they hold my hand, and they examine me, and they touch me. And to that patient, that was incredibly important. It was more important than necessarily the state-of-the-art knowledge that was at the more state-of-the-art center. And so we can never forget those things. Those are very important things. It touches on the technology issue, which, while very, very important, as Dr. Pearl alluded to, the minute that there's that computer between you and the patient and you're looking at the monitor rather than talking to your patient, there's a gap that develops that does not facilitate patient care at all.
So this concludes our Dean's panel for today. So thank you very much to everybody who joined us. So the fair is going on right now at the Quad where it was held yesterday, and lunch is going to be served at 11:30. I think our deans would be willing to stay around in the front up here for a few minutes if anybody has any questions or comments, and we'll see you out at the fair. Thank you very much.